Welcome, everyone, inside our New York City studios. This is the MMA Beat. I am your host for today. My name is Luke Thomas. I am, of course, of SiriusXM Satellite Radio and MMAfighting.com. Our normal host, Ariel Helwani, is in Atlanta this week. He's a globetrotter. He's in Atlanta for UFC 201. I'll be taking over just today. I believe he'll be back next week. Joining me on the panel, to my left, the WashingtonPost.com, as well as a little bit of ESPN as well, Jeff Wagenheim here. Jeff, welcome. And then at the end, Danny Segura as well from MMAfighting.com. The interesting story to this was that Chuck Mindenhall was actually supposed to be here. We did the show prep and everything, well, not the prep, but like the notes, the liner notes, with a four-man team. This is not a joke. He's okay, he's fine. He's just sitting in what do you call it when a train's like stuck? It's not traffic, it's train mess. His train hit a tree on the way here. So now we're down to 3 men. But these two and I, we hope, are up to the task. We appreciate you joining us today. All right, guys. Chuck sold us out. He's a loser. That's okay. We'll cover for his mistakes as an abject failure in his life. Let's kick off with something that is a explosive topic this week. Now, it may have reached some kind of resolution. We don't actually know. But Mark Hunt was on our friend Ariel Helwani's show on Monday. Now, he had made some things public in terms of his discomfort with how he believed the UFC had treated Brock Lesnar's positive test. But then he went on Ariel's show on Monday and ratcheted it up to to the nuclear option, basically, or just shy of it, quite honestly. It was incredible to witness. I want to get your thoughts on that, but more than that, it has been interesting to watch the fallout, because we're in a weird space right now. We talked about the sale ad nauseum on this show and $4 billion and what it meant for guys. Okay, that's cool. But then Ben Henderson comes out and says, I 100% support Mark Hunt. We got this Ali Act kind of floating out there. Kung Lee did an interview on Bloody Elbow expressing support. Matt Mitrione has been taking to Twitter about it. So I guess what I want to do this, Jeff, is start off with you. Number one, what was your impression of Mark Hunt's, incontestable, genuine fury? And two, where are we in terms of that kind of thing moving the needle towards something concrete?
Well, watching Mark Hunt on Ariel's show on Monday, it was like the difference between watching Hunt just out there in a fight, and that's on one side, and the other side being Mark Hunt, who was just noticed that you might be a little bit rocked after he touched you, and now he's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna really come in here with guns a-blazing now. That was it. It was like he must have seen that the few comments he had made earlier, or the comments that were made about his plight, had caught a little bit of attention out there, and he really went for it. And what I was really impressed by was not just what Hunt said on that show, which if you haven't had a chance to see it, check it out, because he said some things. But what has happened since then? There's been some other people come out and kind of supported him, and it does seem as though the bigger picture, Hunt is maybe going to be the guy that leads the bigger picture toward fighters doing that thing that we always talk about in this show. We've talked about it ad nauseum. Other people have talked about it. Fighters joining together and doing something to have a voice, a collective voice in how the sport is run. I think that Hunt, with his the venom in his attack, and he wasn't just attacking Brock Lesnar like he did the first time. This was attacking Lesnar and attacking the UFC, and I think that might be something that triggers some, maybe a little bit more collaboration among the fighters.
What did you think about that? When you heard that, I think you were live tweeting at the time.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
I was actually here in the studio in the control room, and everybody in the control room was just like, what is going on? This is insane. He was just going off, and he was definitely pissed off. That's what I tweeted. But yeah, I feel like now fighters are starting to sort of come together. We saw Joanna Jędrzejczyk, strawweight champion, sort of give some support to Mark Hunt.
That's right, she did.
She said that Brock Lesnar, Mark Hunt should get some of Brock Lesnar's pay.
Yep.
And we're starting to see fighters come together and sort of support each other for the bigger picture. Before, maybe a year ago, or maybe a little more of, fighters were just sort of fending on for themselves. Now we're starting to see that come together. Will it turn into something as big as an association? Who knows? But it's certainly brewing to that direction.
There's some interesting pieces to consider here. I think one, it's always like when someone outside of Zuffa pushes the issue, everyone's like, yeah, but they're outside of Zuffa. So to your point, for Jędrzejczyk to do that is kind of different. But I'm wondering what the intellectual consensus is forming around, because when John Jones caused an event not to happen, or at least that was the public perception, they all lost their minds. And in some cases, I can understand the indignation because if you were on that card, you lost a chance to make money. Jędrzejczyk's is talking about a case where it's not tied to any one event. It's not tied to commerce. It's only tied to what's viewed as artificial or wrongdoing, essentially. Yeah. Is that the most they're going to be able to muster, Jeff? Is just this like we'll coalesce around? Because to me, I don't have a strong opinion about should you find someone who gets caught for PEDs. If someone makes a strong argument for it, fine. If someone is against it, I don't know yet. I don't have an opinion, but it does seem like low-hanging fruit.
First of all, I have to say I'm really surprised to hear you say that you don't have a strong opinion because
yeah, I know.
I don't believe
I really
that.
don't. I haven't considered the merits of it fully.
No. I think that when we take it back, I think that you raising the specter of UFC 151 or the what was supposed to be 151 and went away. I think that's a really good example because back then, who was it that took all the heat for that? It was John Jones, who was
Greg Jackson.
Jones and his team. And here's a guy who was a champion, who was an independent contractor. This is the term that we always hear, whose opponent fell out of a fight and he chose not to defend his belt. He had a lot at stake back then. He had a championship belt. And he chose not to defend it. And he was the one who took all the heat. The UFC took almost no heat. The UFC, here it was, they scheduled all these other fighters to perform that night. Those fighters were not allowed to perform because the event got canceled, and they didn't go out and pay all those guys, and they didn't take the heat for it. The guy that took the heat was the guy who also didn't get a payday. So, now here we are with fighters actually supporting each other as opposed to backbiting each other when something big happens like this. I'm not really sure where you're trying to lead with the question, but I guess that would be what I took away from this, that fighters have gone from fighting each other, I mean, literally in the background, to maybe doing some things where they realize that even if that guy is doing something that isn't violating my self-interest right now, it might at some point later on be something where I'm in that same boat.
Daniel, here's where I was going with this. It's that these guys are operating in a space where they're at the mercy of the rules given to them, okay? But you're starting to see pockets of support for different ideas. Now, not everyone's necessarily on board with the Ali Act, but you are starting to see, for example, TJ Dillashaw made comments on the Alpha Male podcast like, gee, we're independent contractors. I don't really feel like an independent contractor. I think that's one area of intellectual momentum. Do you think this other one that you raised, where finding guys, like the fighters are going to ultimately, in like large numbers, get behind the idea that if you pop, you should be fined some amount, like as a matter of direct course, not so-and-so has the discretion to do it?
Yeah, well, Mark Hunt brought out a good point, which he was saying, these guys pop and then, they're off for a little bit and then they come back and fight again. Yep. So, bringing up the fine would make, fighters sort of double think because now you're taking some monetary, you're taking money away from them. So you're going to make them think, twice about, perhaps using steroids. So I think, that idea is spreading and fighters are coming together to sort of push that.
Do you think it'll work? Let's say the USADA says, okay, we hear you. UFC says, okay, we hear you. 20% of your purse if you pop. Not for a potential violation once the suspension's handed down.
I don't know if it'll work, but I would like to see all that effort be put into perhaps finding the people who are taking steroids before they actually fight, as opposed to focusing on, penalizing a fighter, suspending them for 2 years and taking, their livelihood for 2 years. I would like to see more effort be put into, getting those test results earlier and stopping those, PED users from fighting.
Jeff, where does the money go? I mean, that was one of the fighters
I think what Jędrzejczyk said was, if I'm not mistaken, to the other person.
Right. I think I've heard somebody else say that as well, and I can't remember who it was, but that's a key thing. Now, look, if you are fighting and you don't make weight, what happens? You get a certain portion of your purse goes to the other athlete, and the idea is, well, this guy couldn't make weight, so now we're going to take that and we're going to give it to the guy who has to fight the fighter who's overweight. Well, why would you not do the same thing when you are asking somebody, or somebody has been asked to go in there and fight somebody who is popped for a PED? Why would you? Where's the difference? What's the difference between being a half a pound too heavy as opposed to being enhanced by a substance? It's the same thing, really. And so why should that money go into the coffers of the Nevada Athletic Commission or wherever? So I think that is one, and that would also address some of the concerns that fighters have about the piece of the pie that they're getting in general. I mean, we keep talking about this $5 billion price tag, and the fighters are looking at $5 billion with one. I'm sorry.
You're just throwing billions around now.
Well, what's a billion between the
Yeah, right, of course. I think you're thinking of Yahoo, which was $4.8 billion.
Yeah, right. Well, Yahoo for them. So you get $4 billion that's coming into that's the price tag for the UFC, and think about adding up the purses for all the fighters combined, and that number doesn't come anywhere near where it's not that it's supposed to reach that amount, but it's supposed to reach some semblance of sensibility, and it really hasn't.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to bring up a point. I think when Young Jacek said that, and Mark Hunt has said he should get some of Brock's money. We're talking about a guy who made $2.5 million, right? That we know
at least
that we know of.
Yes.
So again, what we were just saying, that maybe $500,000 take off and give it to Hunt. That's not bad. But what about a guy that's making $20,000 or $15,000? I mean, what do you get?
The ethics of it are complicated because you have a case like Brock where it kind of feels like, I don't know what happened, but I think I speak for a lot of people when I say it feels like you scammed us. That's what it kind of feels like a little bit. But what if there's a guy who, to your point, who was the guy? I forget his name, but he did a post-fight interview after winning and begged for a bonus because his water had been turned off. Now, what if he took something to help himself heal? I know I have different views about PEDs than most people, but I'm just sort of pointing out the ethics begin to get a little bit different. Right. We're talking about Brock Lesnar's $2.5 million versus someone else's $20,000. I want to push the conversations back to Mark Hunt if I can on two different ways, and then we'll push the show along. The first one is I raised a point. Someone was asking me. I saw fans. I posted the link from Mark Hunt on my Facebook page, and I saw a lot of fans very angry at Mark Hunt, saying, "Okay, man, you got a point. All right, you fought a guy on steroids, but you're going too far with it. You sound like a crybaby." And I'm thinking to myself, the interesting part about this is that, did it just occur to Mark that this stuff was happening? In other words, his rage felt like he had been stewing on that for a while. Okay, so I mentioned that lashing out like this with the media is really the only course these guys have. That's why they do it. And someone wrote me an email this morning and they said, well, that's not true. If he wanted, he could take the UFC to court. It's like, did you read the words you wrote before you sent this to me? You think it's an easier option to take the UFC to court and battle their lawyers over something it's not even necessarily clear you could find fault with criminally? Why did Mark, I don't mean why did he express discontent, why did he rage in the way that he did? What did you read from that?
I think that's a valid question because before the fight even happened, he was already talking about Lesnar being juiced up and about,
he called his shot.
Right, and he said, I'm going to knock him out anyway. So I understand some fans out there saying, well, hey, you already knew what you were getting into. You have no right to complain about it. I understand people having that perspective. I don't share that perspective, but I understand where people would say that based upon what Hunt said before the fight. Why did he then ramp it up? I think he was really upset, partly because the UFC had not really reached out to try to mend fences, I guess you might say. From what I read, the UFC did reach out after the interview.
Jeff Nowitzki went and spoke to him, I guess, at length. The contents of the conversation, I don't know.
It's the kind of thing, though, that you think, well, you're a guy, that you're one of the people of the UFC. One of your fighters has just popped. I would think that it would be a good thing to go talk to the opponent, even if just to pass along some words, even if there was no kind of compensation involved. I mean, I think the compensation is something that they're going to want to get, but at least sometimes people just want to be understood. They just want to have somebody to be sympathetic with them. And it felt as though it was like, okay, well, Lesnar popped, we're going to move on. And I think that was maybe the impetus for Hunt taking he had sort of cynicism beforehand, and then it got transformed into anger afterward. I think that might have been part of the reason.
Why did he lash out like that, Danny?
I feel like this was a build-up. This is a guy that fought in pride. I'll just say that much. There was really no regulations there, and he fought guys that eventually went on to, pop for PEDs.
And in the UFC, Frank Mir, and then as well, Bigfoot Silva.
Right.
So this is a guy that's been fighting guys on PEDs for a long time, and I feel like this is 2016. USADA's in place, and he's still fighting guys on PEDs. So that was his rage.
And the money too. I mean, let's not. Here's Hunt. What was Hunt? I don't remember what Hunt's number
roughly
was.
$700K for his.
Yeah, that's what I thought of. And he looks at his paycheck, which is not unsubstantial. It's a pretty good paycheck. But then he looks at the other guy's paycheck and he realizes that guy's making way, way more. You know, as well he should. He was a selling point. He's a box office guy. Lesnar deserves. If Lesnar were clean, he would deserve every cent he got. But he wasn't clean. So I think that Hunt also looked at that and says, here's this guy that you know, as you even pointed out, may have just scammed the system, had no intention of coming in clean, knew he could just cash his check. If Lesnar didn't get a cent of his money until after his drug test came back, I think it would have been a little different. But he has his check. It's in the bank. You know, he's off to his next adventure.
We'll see what the Nevada Commission does. I just find it very interesting to see over time, everyone's like, well, when something bad happens to a fighter, that's when they become this advocate for fighter interests. And there's certainly some truth to that. But to me, the volcanic explosion that you saw from Hunt, it tells me a lot of guys and ladies in the sport are slowly beginning to noodle it. My basic thought on this, and I'll put one last true-false to you, is that if you asked fighters today, do you have a sympathetic attitude towards the idea of a fighters union or association benefiting your life? I think you would find very high response rates to the positive end of that question. If you then said, okay, I want to take action about it tomorrow, that's when it begins to get a real divide. But here's the question for you guys, because someone asked me this, and my answer to this was, I think he will. I mean, maybe he won't. True or false, Mark Hunt will fight in the UFC again?
I think it's true. I think that the UFC has some fences to mend with him. I think the UFC needs to, you know, as you said, has already reached out to him, and I think there's some more entries need to happen with him in order to make him want to do it. But yeah, I'd have to say yes.
Danny?
I would agree. I think he comes back and he'll fight again. Mark Hunt has had issues with the UFC before, and they've been able to overcome them. Now, this is obviously much bigger. We can tell by the way he lashed out. But, you know, it's also a bad move for the UFC just to leave that like that and leave, you know, an angry Mark Hunt. So I'm sure they'll try to work something out with him, and then he'll be back.
And he's important for the Oceanic market, right? He has been a big selling point for them. Okay, other news. So if you can believe it, and I can, because I've worked the hours, Saturday is UFC 201. I think we can all agree, not necessarily the best card. However, the return of Robbie Lawler is obviously must-watch material, of course. We've discussed the fight with Tyron Woodley and its downsides and its benefits. I don't want to get back into that, but I guess what I do want to say is, boy, the month of July was insane. So let's recap what happened very quickly in the month of July. First of all, we're going to have UFC 201, but to start things off, UFC Fight Night 90, Ultimate Fighter 23 finale, UFC 200, then we had Sioux Falls, then we had the Fox event, which we'll get to later in the show, and now UFC 201. Then on top of that, John Jones, potentially the greatest fighter ever. Oh, by the way, he has a potential violation with USADA. Brock Lesnar, he also has a potential violation with USADA. Anderson Silva comes out to potentially save the day and rocks Daniel Cormier up the gut, and then they sell the UFC for $4 billion. I cannot imagine another month in the UFC's history nearly as consequential as this one. Now that we are coming to a close, and this partly hinges on what happens at UFC 201, is it a dud event? Is it a great event? So we're grading a little bit early, but just use your crystal ball, Jeff. How was the month of July? Was it a success for the UFC?
Well, if you're in the news, it's a success. I mean, think about it. You can take it two different ways. All the drug test failures, you can take it two different ways. On the one hand, you could say, well, those guys are all on PEDs. Or you can look at it as, hey, they're cleaning up the sport. And they're cleaning up the sport at its highest level. I mean, there doesn't get any higher than John Jones. And I mean that in terms of level, not in...
Maybe Nick Diaz, which we'll get to later.
And one thing you mentioned all the different cards, but what you didn't mention is, you know, two different titles changed hands during that
Right,
month.
sure.
And, you know, there's the potential for another one to change hands this weekend.
Yep.
Robbie Lawler, I believe, if he wins, I believe he will be tied with Jędrzejczyk as the second longest reigning champion in terms of title defenses. He's had 2 title defenses.
This will be 3.
She has 3. The only Mighty Mouse has more. Mighty Mouse has them all beat by a mile. But that's pretty amazing. There's, like, I don't know how many champions haven't even defended their belts once because belts are just going like crazy. So I think that's kind of a symbolic way of putting the way I look at this month, it is a month of absolute transition. We're seeing the drug test failure signaling that the UFC is taking that more seriously because they're doing it with their biggest stars, and of course the major transition of the organization being sold to a new company. So I would say it's a success in the sense that it's that there's a lot of movement going on. It's not stagnant at all.
I think it was a success, although there was some bumps in the road. I think overall it was a success. Just the fact that they sold for $4 billion, that's a success alone. But even the little setbacks, or not the little setbacks, but the things they had with John Jones and Brock Lesnar, the UFC is hotter than ever. It's in the news. We saw international coverage, papers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Guardian, all those outlets were covering the sale, and they're sort of hopping onto MMA as well. So I think it was overall a successful month. They had some successful events. We were just talking about the UFC on Fox that did almost a little bit over.
We'll get to that in a minute.
So just overall, the month was pretty solid for the UFC.
In a kind of a wacky way, the absence of McGregor versus Diaz, or I should say Diaz versus McGregor too, since Diaz won the first one, may work out for them because instead of it getting kind of lost in the muck of all the stuff that was going on during this month, the 3 cars on 3 nights and the sale and all that stuff, now it's something to look forward to. And I know that, as soon as Saturday's fight's over, we've already seen a lot of stuff related to that fight, and we saw Diaz on who was it? Was it Conan? And we and then of course they brought on McGregor, and that got Diaz pissed off. So we're already seeing like that sort of bubbling up a little bit.
Right.
We saw your great hero Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yes.
Doing a little bit of a training.
He needs a better tan. He's not tan enough.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's standing next to Conor McGregor, who is got the Irishman's.
He's pasty white. Yeah.
So in a way, having that fight not happen in July, but having it to look forward to in August is, kind of helps push the momentum along a little bit too.
What's interesting about the month, about the month of July to me when I look back on it, and again, still not over. We got one big event to go on Saturday. It's look, boxing is going to get hot again if they can produce another big star. We'll see what happens with Deontay Wilder and if they can make a fight to unify the heavyweight belts with, whose name is now escaping me, the Irish Traveler. The boy's British, but...
Fury?
Yes, Fury. How could I forget? But it's incredible to me how quickly the MMA world is changing. Now, we talked last week, remember when I said they were putting chips in the NFL uprights because they're constantly tinkering and they're constantly making changes. I feel like MMA fans, with the way the UFC, now, they can't do 6 every month, of course. I mean, some months there's going to be 1 or 2, or maybe none, who knows. But certainly they can coalesce around these moments in time. And it's just always spinning. There's always something to be engaged on. We come on this show, we're never short for topics. Right. I kind of enjoy that. It's a little bit like a benefit of when a sport is hot, more kind of is more. Now, when a sport is cold, I think less is more. But right now, I'll start with you here on this, Danny. I feel like the fans can't get enough.
Yeah, I would agree. I think...
And relative to boxing, where it's the slow turn of the screw, it just feels like, we're on fiber internet and they're on dial-up AOL back in the day,
Yeah, things are moving fast. The titles are changing hands every month.
Every week,
Every week,
seems.
yeah. And potentially we can see another title change here, and then we got UFC 202 coming up as well, which that's big news as well. So yeah, I don't think fans. I think fans are really enjoying things because there's a lot going on in the MMA.
Is it too
world.
much turnover?
Well, no, I think that I think the volatility is what keeps people interested. You talked about the NFL and how they're always tinkering with things. Now, I don't think boxing is dead. That's the big thing that you hear. Sometimes we'll hear amongst MMA fans. Boxing is going to be around when we're all dead.
It's a star-driven sport. If they get a star, it's fine.
It's always going to survive. But the one thing you can say about boxing is not that many different things have changed. I mean, it went from the 15 round to the 12 rounds. That was the last big change that I can think of where boxing has significantly been altered. But in MMA, just recently, we started seeing all the early weigh-ins. That's a significant thing. I mean, I know it's a kind of a...
That's another thing that sort of took off this month.
Right, that's a kind of behind-the-scenes thing that's been happening, but it's really a significant thing in the way that athletes are able to perform. And then if you're not familiar with that, it always has been that the athletes would weigh in the day before, but specifically about 24 hours before the fight's card begins. Now they're allowed to weigh in earlier in that day during a window, and it really allows them more time to rehydrate and become the athlete that they want to be. And it's a small behind-the-scenes change, but it's the kind of thing that it gives me hope that some other things will change. Maybe some of the scoring things will change. Maybe some other things that will make the sport better will change. So it's not just a matter of titles changing hands. It's not just a matter of scheduling 3 fight cards on 3 nights. There's also some stuff that's going on behind the scenes that I think makes the sport kind of alive, almost in that same way that the NFL is doing, always like moving the parts around a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. It's not only the fights that are happening and you know, the titles changing and all that. It's, you know, behind the scenes. You know, USADA, John Jones, Brock Lesnar, the sale, the early weigh-ins. All these things are going on as well behind the scenes that, you know, have some effect in the fights as well. And, you know, it keeps the fans talking about, you know, MMA.
And also, like, even with 200, it was a huge event. Maybe it wasn't what UFC 196 was in terms of pay-per-view sales, and maybe 202 will do more. And as you mentioned, maybe in the end that was better for them. But not even thinking about that, July wasn't just busy, but it was, with 200, it was a demarcation line. Like, okay, let's take a moment to stop and reflect how far we've come. And in the middle of a month of craziness and transition, as you pointed out, and activity and change, it's just really remarkable. You know, I remember in 2011, I just kind of felt like there were so many MMA events that promoters were just putting out lazily. And now I feel like not only are they putting out effort, but they have so much more to work with, and it's just firing on all cylinders. I don't know how much longer this is going to last, but it feels amazing right now.
Yeah, it also feels to me about how it's almost as though the sport has gone from being two-dimensional to three-dimensional in a weird way, in that it used to be that the whole paradigm was you build yourself up to become a champion. That was really what every fighter, pretty much everybody out there, wanted to do, build themselves up to get to the top of the mountain. But that's not really where it's at anymore. I mean, I think Conor McGregor has become the leader in that and brought people like Nick Diaz along for the ride. It's not just about becoming a champion. It's about becoming a star. It's about becoming a bankable star and making a lot of money. And you know, Nate certainly is the whole reason we're getting this rematch between McGregor and Diaz is because, you know, Diaz has become a big star as well, and McGregor realizes that the star power is from that fight, not going back to 145 immediately and defending his belt. So there's almost like 2 tracks going on simultaneously, and that's also another dimension of giving the fight fans something different. It's not just who's that guy wearing that belt.
Right.
The Moneyweight division really took off this year, and
yes,
you know, I think that's a very exciting division too. So, you know, it's not just about the title anymore. It's, you know, about making fun fights and cashing in on that.
Yeah. It always has been. It just feels a little more forward now,
yeah.
Right? Or at least the guys who can do that can set records. Before it was just sort of, can you headline maybe a big card? So one of the things that happened in July, of course, was we had UFC on Fox 20 last weekend. Valentina Shevchenko upsetting Holly Holm. Or maybe not, depending on your perspective, but certainly she won that bout handily. And then you looked at the gate, and the ticket sales were frankly not great, borderline miserable, only 10,000. Now, this is a city they've gone back to repeatedly year after year. I don't know why. Chicago doesn't deserve it. But nevertheless, they get it. And actually, I like Chicago. But the point being is, the gate was not an indication of the event's success. And then the ratings come out, and whoa, whoa, whoa. They peaked at nearly 4.7 million, the average just a hair, just a tick, under 3. So there are 2 stories coming out of that. Number one, certainly we know Holly Holm is a draw, right? She was on 193 where she beat Ronda. I mean, instant stardom. Then she was on 196 and she lost, but it was a big fight. She didn't look bad in it. I mean, she got submitted, but we all know the story. Then she goes from pay-per-view to Fox. So for me, the takeaway there is, we talked about this last week on the show, Ariel was right, that if you try to go from Fox to pay-per-view, I don't know that people follow you. But if you are on big-time pay-per-views and you go to Fox and you're a star, they're going to follow you. 2, the women, it's more than just Ronda Rousey who can be big stars. They clearly can draw. Here's the bad news. Kat Zingano, 2 losses in a row. Miesha Tate lost her title, 1 loss. Holly Holm, 2 losses in a row. Ronda Rousey lost, and who knows when she's going to be back. So, Jeff, we have this super exciting division that's proving that these new young guns are just forcing their way to the top. Who could be mad at that long term? But all of the draws in the division are coming off of losses. What do you do with women's bantamweight?
Yeah, well, it's almost as though it's a microcosm of the sport in general. We were talking earlier about how Mighty Mouse is really the only really long-term champion. I mean, I guess you could say the other women's division is as well, with a champion who's defended 3 times. But really, almost all the divisions have a lot of transition going on. But the women's bantamweight has more transition than any of them, and maybe more than all of them put together. I think I would try to find some creative matchmaking where maybe you put together a fight card that has 2 or 3 fights featuring the top people in that division, and so see if in one night you can create 3 stars, or not create 3 stars because some of them are already stars, but kind of like elevate 3 stars. Do something that's going to really allow somebody to jump away from the pack, because it's not as though you've got bad fighters. You've got
No.
You know, it was for a long time. It was the Ronda Rousey show. Ronda, and then everybody else a mile and a half back. It was like Ronda was secretariat, and everybody was 27 lengths behind. That's not the case anymore. Now we've got, coming down the stretch on any given Saturday night, you've got a whole bunch of women who can win that fight. So let's see if we can create a little separation and try to find somebody who can be that next person.
I think the women's bantamweight division is at the best. It's in the best shape it's ever been. I think although you guys might disagree and see this a problem of the women, these superstars coming off from losses. I think it's not that big of a deal. I mean, obviously Holly Holm was coming off from a loss, and she did well in the ratings. I'm sure if Miesha Tate comes back on, she'll do well, too. And of course, if Ronda Rousey, comes back in the scene, regardless of her knockout loss, she's gonna do great as well. And then on the plus side, you've built other stars as well. Now you got. Well, Amanda Nunes, she has a belt. Just the fact
she's a star now.
Well, I didn't say she's a star, but just the fact that she is a champion. I mean, you can make the argument that before she was a champion, not that many people knew of Amanda Nunes. Maybe just the hardcore fans. And now, just because she does have that championship belt, and she beat Miesha Tate, she has some following. She has created some following. So that's how you create stars. Holly Holm wasn't a huge star. She might have been very skilled prior to fighting Ronda Rousey, but she became a huge star after beating Ronda Rousey.
Right, but these are all women who were like not quite well, some literally, but it's like the Ronda halo. Like the people Ronda touched. So Miesha Tate, Holm, to a lesser degree, Zingano was in that Tate orbit because they had that thing, and she was supposed to be in the Ultimate Fighter and all that. Those are the ones that got it. It's not clear that Nunes is going to pick it up. It's not clear that Shevchenko is going to pick it up. It's not clear. Now, Pena, I think, is a little bit different. I think she has that star potential. She just needs that big push to the top. But I'm not saying all is lost. But what I am saying is that easy dovetail you were going to get of Rousey versus Holm or Rousey versus Tate, we'll figure this out, that does appear, at least for the time being, to definitely not be on the table.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think the Holm loss changes that whole dynamic. I think you do lose that mega fight. That we were talking for a while about how there were a few different options for a mega fight. Now, even though who would have ever thought that Rousey versus Tate 3 would have been a mega fight, but because Rousey handled her pretty easily in the first 2 times, or at least pretty handily, but that would have been a big fight. If Tate had held on to that belt and come into the fight as a champion, I think that would have been a big fight for Ronda's return. Certainly a Holly Holm rematch would have been a big return. And we saw that, because Holly is the woman who beat the woman, she became a star, but now her star power does get diminished. I think we do have a lot of women here, other than Ronda Rousey, who has built-in star power. I think we've got a lot of other women who have proven to be good at a certain level, but they need another step. They need that step ladder that's going to bring them up to another level or bring them back to another level. And I don't think that I would agree that any of them are there yet. I think but I think there's some potential for somebody to step up there.
Yeah, I don't think Pena or Nunes are not star powers right now, but they're certainly on the come up. And I would disagree that those mega fights are lost. You put Holly Holm, even though she's coming off 2 losses against Ronda Rousey, I'm sure that'll do great.
But Ronda's supposed to fight for the title when she comes back.
Is she supposed to?
I mean, okay. Dana White said it. I don't know.
We know that if Dana White says it, of course. We don't need to be here. Then.
Dana White said the UFC was not unsafe.
Yes, he said many things. Okay, but let's work under the assumption that that's correct for just a second.
Yeah.
That's what's going. At least that's their stated intention. Now maybe that changes because the UFC never anticipated that the person holding the belt would be somebody who has not really been built up as any kind of a box office attraction, so they could change it. But let's say they do keep it. Hey, if Ronda comes back, she fights with the title. Now, what do you do next, Danny Segura? Who gets the next title shot? How do you keep that division moving at a steady clip, knowing that at some point, it's like double dutch. Ronda's going to jump in here at some point. What do you do?
I think for now, Juliana Pena should get that shot. She deserves it,
Yep.
one. And two, I agree with you. She has potential to become that star. And, if she does become champion, more eyes will be on her. And if Ronda Rousey comes back and fights Juliana Pena, I think that'll be a big fight as well.
Does she speak Spanish, by the way?
Yes, she does.
She does?
She's Venezuelan, yeah.
Well, I mean, there's people who are Venezuelan who do not speak Spanish.
She does speak Spanish. I'm not sure if she's 100% fluent, but I know she speaks Spanish.
Okay, just curious.
So, and that itself can, open up another market,
sure.
in Latin America, which is very hot right now.
Yep.
So I think that's the route the UFC should go, book Juliana Pena versus Amanda Nunes, and I think that should be a fun fight. Both are pretty good strikers and are exciting fighters. And then, we've learned this year that, you can give title shots like this. So, you give Holly Holm a fight, she wins impressively, people forget about her 2 losses, and you can put her back in title contention, and, she can win a fight, and then you can do the Rousey, or you can do that with Tate as well.
Here's the risk of that strategy. I just mentioned you have Zingano, Holm, Tate, Rousey, all coming off of losses. Pena's the next star. Then you could have Pena, Holm, Tate, Rousey, Zingano, all coming off of losses. Jeff, do you go the Shevchenko route? Our buddy Simon Head over in the UK, he likes the Shevchenko route for a rematch with Nunes. Do you agree?
I think Pena's the one. I think that's the one, and I think that she's the one that's been, the killer out there, and I'd like to see her get that shot. I don't think that I would, if Shevchenko gets the shot, I certainly would not look at it as a miscarriage of justice. I think it would be, I think she's right there in line. I'm kind of curious about, I know they keep toying with this idea of filling the gap between 135 and 115 and bringing in a 125-pound thing. I would love to see. I'd love to see Shevchenko get another tangle with Jędrzejczyk. It would be a pronunciation goldmine. For the announcer. Like just to hear Mike Goldberg try to announce it, a fight would be a lot of fun.
That would be fun.
But I'm not sure how they would do that because they've got a reigning 115 champion moving up to another division. But again, we are in a different world with fight making. We want to see the fights that we want to see, and sometimes we're not as interested in waiting for who has the belt and who's going to be maneuvering in and out. I do agree with you that when Rousey comes back, they're going to probably put her in with whoever the reigning champion is.
At a minimum, I feel like they're going to give her number 1 contender fight.
I feel like the UFC still, in its heart of hearts, likes to make those belts have some significance, and so I think that they're going to push her into that fight. And look, she's just got the kind of star power. They could put her in with anybody, and it's going to be a huge deal. Ronda Rousey coming back, come on. They could put her in with anybody, so it doesn't really matter which one of the names goes with her. She's going to make that fight into a big star power. But we're talking about Juliana Pena, and I do think she's the one that I'm going to go with Danny. I think that's the fight to make.
I think it'll be a hell of a fight too.
I just wanted to add on side note. This is not 100% related, but Shevchenko actually speaks very well Spanish.
She does.
And she lives in Peru, and she's got a Peruvian accent going on as well. So just adding that up.
She does. Actually, she was on my show on Monday, and I actually made her say in Spanish, "The Luke Thomas Show is the greatest show in the world." I actually have that clip.
Wow.
Yeah, and I played it for my wife. She was amazed at her Spanish. It was great. So yeah, she definitely does. So moving things along, I don't know if he speaks Spanish or not. Doesn't matter because today is, let's see, the 28th of July. So it turns out that August 1st, if I'm not mistaken, the suspension of one Nick Diaz will come to a close. So that means by the time we do this show again, Nick Diaz will be free and clear and ready to compete, okay? He also turns, I believe, 33 August 2nd. So, gentlemen, I know you are excited as I am. Danny, I will start with you on this one. What do you do next with Nick Diaz? Because I feel like the big revelation of Nate Diaz is Now, look, there's only one. There's only one Conor McGregor. Okay, but if you can matchmake a Diaz brother correctly, boom goes the dynamite. You don't put them on a title track unless the title track also makes box office sense. Right. People love the Diaz brothers. We all like the Diaz brothers. What do you do with Nick Diaz next?
That is a very difficult question because there's some guys out there that you can say, okay, well, this fight makes sense, and there's some obvious fights that make sense for certain guys. With Nick Diaz, I don't know if there's any fight out there that truly makes sense.
Oh, come on. Oh, come on. You can't. Certainly, you cannot believe this.
I mean,
there's no fight out there that you're like, ooh, well, I'd like to see that.
Well, I would personally love to see him fight, for example, a Hector Lombard. I think that would be an amazing fight. I know Lombard's at 185, but he's fought at welterweight. Lombard is a small, like a short.
And Nick can fight at middleweight as well.
Lombard is a short middleweight, anyways. I think that should be a very exciting fight. I don't know if it'll have the power as Diaz McGregor, because I don't really think the trash talking is fully there between Diaz and Lombard. I don't even think they have beef or any type of history. But just the style of the fight, I think that's a very good fight for a return.
I'm going to sympathize with Danny, who's wavering about what fight to make, because I was thinking about Nick's return, and so I was looking at the rankings of the top 170 pounders and the top 185ers, and I was thinking, maybe here. And every time I would think about, oh, maybe that'd be a good fight, I'd realize, wait a second, that guy's already booked with so and so, and it seemed like all the good fights. All the top guys are booked with somebody else, unless you're starting to go with some of the guys who've just recently lost fights. But one guy who's not booked with anybody is somebody else who hasn't been inside the cage for a while, whose suspension also is coming to a close, and who actually is all finished, and I believe has already started. Working with USADA to do some testing.
Been tested twice. I think I know.
You know who I'm talking about, don't you?
Drum roll.
And it's somebody who.
Is it Chuck Mindenhall?
It's not Chuck Mindenhall, but it's close.
Yeah.
No, it's somebody who, like Conor McGregor. In fact, before Conor McGregor was around, this was the guy that everybody talked about, and that would be Mr. Chael Sonnen.
Yep.
It's a weird matchup because one of the things I've always disliked in matchups for Nick Diaz is I don't want to put him in there with a guy who's just going to wrestle him. And I think that's kind of what might happen is Chael would go in there and try to take him down. It might not be, the execution of the fight might not be that exciting, but the build-up to it would be gold. And that would be the one guy that I would say, even though I'm not so sure that the fight would live up to the build-up, I think the build-up would be so amazing that I would just for that alone, I want to see it. And I also, maybe if with Chael being out there for a while, maybe he would try to stand with the guy a little bit, and it could be a lot of fun.
I like the Chael Sonnen idea, and I want to talk about him in just a minute. But just to finish with Nick Diaz, with what we have, obviously, he probably wants to get right to work. So I don't know if this works for him. I personally love the idea of Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler. I've been saying this for how long? I don't know. I think if Robbie Lawler loses,
right,
you could definitely make it. If he wins, hell, I mean, you could make that too, to be quite honest. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could do it.
Right.
I like Nick Diaz, Michael Bisping. Danny, you like that idea?
Yeah, I like that idea. I also like the Robbie Lawler one. But again, to what I was saying, Robbie Lawler, for example, is fighting for the title. So if he wins, I wouldn't really.
Really? We got Michael Bisping fighting Dan Henderson.
Dan Henderson's coming off a win.
So? He's ranked like 150th in the world or something in the division.
13th.
Pretty far away.
13th.
Pretty far away.
Nick Diaz is not even ranked.
I realize that this is the world we live in, where fighters do get title shots.
This is the problem with giving guys a title shot when they're ranked 13. Because then my mind starts going, well, if you can do this, you can do this.
Right. So I would not endorse a fight with Bisping or with Lawler while they have that belt. I just can't endorse that at all. But if Robbie Lawler loses on Saturday night, that jumps ahead. That's the first fight I want to see. I want to see that rematch between Nick Diaz and Robbie Lawler. I want to see that one. And if we're talking about guys coming off losses, I wouldn't mind seeing Nick Diaz go up against that guy who no longer has a UFC contract but might stick around, Roy McDonald. I mean, that's another guy that if they can,
that'd be a fun fight.
They could bring that guy back in. So I mean, that's kind of where we're at in a way, because it seems like all the guys who are on the winning trajectory are already booked with somebody, and it's the guys who are coming down. And but you know what? That's what it's in. You know, Nate Diaz, Nick's brother, was the guy who said that title shots that's a fairy tale.
Yep.
And I believe that that's really the case, especially if you're a guy like Nick, who's you might as well give him the money fight. That's why I suggest Chael, because it's a golden opportunity to have two guys who just imagine that the press conferences for that. Just imagine the buildup. Just imagine all that. That'd be a lot of fun. But if you're talking about the actual fight, I 100% go with your idea about Robbie Lawler, as long as he's not wearing that belt.
There are two fights that I feel like we have to have happen. I think one is now lost forever. I would have really liked to have seen Frankie Edgar versus Conor McGregor. Sorry, I have something in my eye. It's driving me crazy. Because I feel like that would be an interesting style matchup for him, even though obviously Edgar can't get past Aldo. And the other one is the rematch between Lawler and Diaz. That first one was crazy. Both guys are in very different positions, no one more so than Lawler. I'm sure he doesn't think about the loss as like, I need to get revenge, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind it either. I want to see that. You brought up Chael Sonnen. I love this news. Now, I'm not one of these guys who's typically, gee, guy's been off forever, comes back, this is something to be excited about. So I'm not like up here cheering. I'm not going to donate GoFundMe money to express my enthusiasm. But what I would say is, if they matchmake him right, now I have not much interest in seeing him versus Weidman. I have not much interest in seeing him versus Rockhold. Right. But someone said to me, hey, if Chael Sonnen comes back, Danny, and fights Anderson Silva, do you like that fight? And I said, I kind of do like that fight. And here was my logic. Do you agree, or do you have another way of looking at it? If someone said to you, X beat Y twice, you want to see X fight Y a third time, you'd be like, no, there's no point. But I feel like both guys are like kind of elder statesman roles a little bit, maybe less distinguished than they used to be, right? They've had a couple political scandals here and there. But I can't say that the third fight will go anything like the second fight or maybe the first fight. It feels like they're just athletically, just in really weird, different, unique positions. I'm kind of pumped for it.
I would love to see that. One of my favorite press conferences ever was leading up to UFC 117.
Yeah.
That was just amazing. I think that was really one of the first conferences we saw in MMA where guys were just, Chael mainly was really promoting the fight. And now obviously we see that with Conor McGregor. So yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to a third fight. Both guys, are in, very different spots in their career. There's no belt on the line, and that is, I would like to consider this a money-weight division fight. Right. I don't want to see Anderson Silva, or unless he does something a crazy comeback. But I don't see him fighting for the title. I don't see Chael fighting for the title. Both are about the same age, the same spots, or so towards the end of their career. So why not?
Yeah,
it'll be fun.
I'm on the same page with that. I feel like we do have this other trajectory of the sport where we have that money weight. We have the guys who just can promote, and that's part of the reason I'm kind of bothered by that Dan Henderson getting that title. I think that if Dan Henderson wants to keep fighting, have him fight somebody interesting, and if Bisping didn't have the belt, that would have been an interesting rematch because of their first fight. But I want to see that. I don't want those two tracks to combine. I don't want to see title fights that are just kind of, carnival attractions. I want to see the carnival attractions that are separate. And I think Sonnen, is a great example of that. Now we'll see. Chael Sonnen existed in the sport at a time before McGregor was around. So it was almost as though Chael Sonnen took trash talking. It was almost as though MMA was broadcast in black and white, and then he brought along the color TV and gave it something different. But then along comes Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor turned it into HD. And so we would be taking a step back to the Chael Sonnen version of trash talking. Maybe it won't be as interesting and as exciting as what we've come to expect from Conor McGregor, but I'm willing to take a look at it. And I think you put any of these guys who are, you put him in an interesting matchup where he can utilize all his tools. I think that's a good thing. And obviously another fight with Anderson Silva, he's got so much ammunition that he can just pull out of his holster. And
shared history is, you don't find a lot of guys who have history like that with each other.
Yeah, so that's where I just think that the UFC has an opportunity to do some interesting, creative matchmaking with the guys who are coming back, Sonnen, Diaz. Maybe they don't want to put them together. Maybe they want to utilize two different guys who go in that trajectory. But, as I said before, I'm kind of a little greedy. I wouldn't mind seeing the two of them together.
So we moved from Chael Sonnen to Baby Slice. Bellator announced this week UFC 160, I believe, is when he's going to make his debut. This will be the card Benson Henderson fights Patricio Freire at the, I believe, in Anaheim, formerly at what used to be called the Pond, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, he's 24 years old. He has one amateur fight. Jeff, I'm going to start with you because you were there for that amateur fight, if I'm not mistaken. 83 seconds. The question I have is not how did he look. He has one amateur fight. How do you expect him to look? It's impossible. You have 83 seconds of footage. What could you, unless he had a flying triangle, and even then it wouldn't tell you a whole lot. It's impossible to evaluate him. But here's what people said to me, and let me see what you think about it. They said, this is gross, right? Bellator is surfing off the notoriety from the death of his father. Bellator officials tell me they signed him in April. You can believe that, you can reject it, but I guess to you, I'll put this question. Is it gross the way they are doing this?
I don't think so. And I also, before I go into my answer, I do want to give a shout out to the guy who didn't make it here, Chuck Mindenhall. He and I were the only right. two media members that night at the Hukilau Polynesian restaurant.
Where was this?
It was the Hukilau Polynesian restaurant in Chicopee, Massachusetts. We were there,
wow.
Cage side, the only two media members watching Baby Slice perform, and it was actually pretty fun.
You and 50 Kid Rock fans.
It was exactly. He was there the week before, I think.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
But here, the fact this guy did not become a name just because his dad passed away. Baby Slice was a name while his dad was ruling the roost at Bellator. So whether the UFC, whether Bellator, I should say, is telling us the truth or not about when they signed him in April or didn't, I mean, it certainly was inevitable that Bellator was going to sign this guy, even if his dad was still around, because he's Baby Slice. He's Kimbo Slice's his namesake. His name is also Kevin Ferguson, and he is. There's a lot of reasons to sign this kid, and those are plenty. And I don't have this. If anything, they're giving an opportunity to a young guy who lost his dad, and I know they're not just doing it as a favor to him. They're going to try to market and they're going to try to make their money off of it. But I will say this: when I talked to him afterward, he's got his head on his shoulders straight. He's a really smart kid. His dad would not let him train full time until he went through college. He said, I want you to have all your options. So he went to college. He learned, I think he majored in art and photography, and he's done other stuff. He's a well-spoken, a really nice kid. And he also
Did you interview him? Did you have a chance?
Yeah. We chatted to him after the fight. He was sitting there with his phone in front of him, waiting to, as soon as he finished with us, because I was sitting with Chuck, he grabbed his phone to call his dad to tell him how he did, because obviously they did not have, Spike TV was not at the Hukilau that
night. Right, I can imagine they weren't.
So it was, and also if you saw those 83 seconds, he's not Kimbo Slice. He's not Baby Slice in the sense that he goes out there and does the same things. He's a guy that, he looks like a guy who has trained MMA. He's obviously won amateur fights, so I'm not talking about this guy being a future champion.
No, but it's not Cecil Prince Fielder where they're just two fat guys who bomb
right.
baseballs.
He's a guy who takes this stuff seriously, and so I'm excited to see him.
Was it gross what they did?
I don't think so. Let's just say there's someone out there who's older, who has less fighting experience, and is fighting in a more competitive.
I don't know who you're talking about, Danny.
Really?
Yeah, I've never heard of him.
So no, I don't think it's gross. I think Bellator is actually a perfect fit for Baby Slice. I think as you said, he's young. He's only had one amateur fight, so he has a lot of room to grow. And Bellator can do that for him. Can find him the right matchups, get him experience. Sort of like what they did with Michael Page. Although Michael Page is obviously a bit more skilled. And has had more experience. Has had more experience. They can do a similar thing where they can build him up, and he's got a name obviously because of his dad. So no, I don't think it's gross. I think actually is pretty good, and it's a good promotion where they can build them up. Plus, it has like attention and a following that can put some eyes on Baby Slice.
Bottom line, would we be questioning the Bellator? If we would have different questions for Bellator if Kimbo were still alive and they signed his son, we'd be like, well, this kid's just got his his contract because his dad is famous, and that really is if you're going to evaluate it, it's because on those grounds. Not that it's gross that they're ghoulishly taking advantage of a fighter who passed away. I think that you could say, does he deserve to get a Bellator contract based upon what he's done in the cage? No, of course not. But I'm all for it. Why not?
Right, that's not the world we live in. A couple of responses. One, I often talk about how there's plenty of fair criticisms to make a Bellator. I mean, it's not hard to make a reasonable criticism of them. This, to me, feels like that territory that we always leaned into with Strikeforce, where we were unnecessarily critical of them. This feels exactly like that. The second part is there's this team native to the D.C. area. They used to be the Maryland Nighthawks. Now I think it's like the Anne Arundel Nighthawks. But it's a basketball team of semi-pros. And it's just a gimmick. So one night they'll have 5 guys who start. They're all 7-footers. They can't play basketball worth a lick, but it's just a gimmick to get you in the door. This is MMA fans are we want all the best fighters in the UFC, but we don't want promoters to try other gimmicks because that would be not the same thing the UFC. They have to try gimmick. They literally have to do gimmicks to get people into the door. This is I don't know how good he is, but it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick, Jeff, that I'm okay with. Very quickly as we wind down time here. Joe Rogan sort of not quite announced, but basically announced on his podcast, I think Jeremy Stevens was the guest, that he's going to be commentating UFC events for at least another year with a caveat, no international travel, no UFC on Fox shows. I love this. Personally, this is just me personally, I believe that Anik and Stan are the best commentary duo they have. I do think Hardy and Gooden should be used more. But the key feature, what Joe Rogan represents is that he was the right guy for that job at the time the UFC needed him. He was a bit of an everyman. He had never fought, but he knew really well how to communicate to all of our brains exactly what we were seeing. He got better as the job went along. I think if they had too technical a guy who was like Mr. Network TV, it wouldn't have worked. I think they're ready for a transition, but fans, their passions die hard. Jeff, do you like the fact that he's sticking around?
Yeah, I do. I like Joe Rogan. I do like the other voices, some of which you mentioned, and I want to hear more of those guys. And this is sort of the best of both worlds. We get a chance to hear Rogan for a lot of cards. There's still going to be a significant number. I guess if he's just doing the pay-per-views, then he'll get, about 13 cards?
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, approximately. Actually, if they do international ones, maybe fewer. But still, we'll still get this chance to hear him, which is fine. I like the guy. But I do want to hear more. I want to see, Anik calling the fights with Stan. I want to, as you said, the British guys. I want to hear that more. So, it's win-win. We still get to see Rogan. We get to hear other guys as well.
I think it's a nice transition because Rogan has been around for a long time, so there's sort of that nostalgia there. He sort of like Bruce Buffer. He's part of the UFC. So that transition where he's still going to be around, maybe not as much, but he's still going to be doing some commentating. I think that's a good transition. They're going to do that.
I don't want Buffer. I mean, Buffer's got to stay in the cage though. We can't.
I like Buffer just fine. I'm a little bit partial to Joe Martinez. That's kind of my guy.
I'm not as.
You don't like Joe Martinez?
I think Buffer's so UFC. It's we're really.
I'm not saying otherwise. I'm just saying you have to, 51-49. I'm a little bit Joe Martinez, but that's just me. Before we go, Jesus, this month just won't end. There are 3 events this weekend. World Series of Fighting 32, if I'm not mistaken. Invicta, which is going to be on Saturday night as well. Leave it to World Series of Fighting. Hey, we want to go head-to-head with the UFC pay-per-view. Great job, guys. Invicta 18, which will be Friday night, and then, of course, UFC 201. So I'll start this and work this way. Danny, what is your favorite under-the-radar? Because we're all going to say, I want to see Lawler. Favorite under-the-radar fight for this weekend?
I have 2. I would say number 1 would be Ian McCall versus Scoggins. I think.
Ooh, that's a good choice. Yep.
I think that is a very good
choice?
fight.
Dagger.
Very competitive fight. That's high-level MMA right there. Ian McCall hasn't fought since January of 2015. It's been a long time. He's somehow still ranked number 5 in the division. So and I know he's had several injuries. So that's why he hasn't been able to return. So I'm excited.
And flirtation with quitting altogether.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see him return and see how he does. And he's fighting a very game opponent. I believe Scoggins is ranked number 13. Ranked number 13th, you can get title shots. So, he's fighting somebody very game, and I'm excited for that fight. The other fight, I'm probably a bit more biased. It is Freddy Serrano. He's Colombian. But I think he has an interesting story. This guy is He's 3-0. He's undefeated. He's very young into his career. He's not so young.
Is he 35
he's
now?
36, I think.
36, wow.
But, again, I was talking to him, and he was telling me, he's had the same path as these other great guys that have been doing amazing in the UFC. Yoel Romero, Henry Cejudo. In fact, they wrestled twice.
Freddie Serrano is the greatest wrestler to ever come out of Colombia.
Yeah.
Period.
Daniel Cormier. He knew all those guys before. King Mo as well. He knew all those guys before, they started their fighting career. Now that he's bumping, into them in the UFC, they're like, oh, how's it going? So, he's got a lot of potential. I'm not saying he could be the next flyweight champion, but, he definitely has potential to get up there and have a good, solid career.
Could be a good linchpin for them if they ever want to go to South America as well.
Definitely.
Jeff?
Before I get my choice, I want to hear you say his name again.
Freddie Serrano.
To you and me, it's Freddie Serrano.
Yes.
Hey, can you do the pick for Chuck?
I was going to.
Okay,
yes.
great.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
absolutely. Well, my pick was going to be also McCall, so I guess I will have to go.
And then
Chuck.
Tree versus Train.
Yeah, well, exactly. and part of McCall's thing was, you talk about him still being ranked. He's only fought twice in the last 3 years,
Wow.
right? And he's coming off. He's lost 3 of his last 5 fights. In fact, he's failed to win in 4 of his last 6 because he had a draw with Mighty Mouse. Then he lost to Mighty Mouse. Then he lost to Benavidez. And then he's lost to Lineker. So when you think about a guy that's on a losing track, that's not a guy that's really on a losing track. That's a guy who's losing to really the top guns,
the elites, yeah.
the best guys out there. So I think that I'm really interested in seeing whether that guy can, sort of get his act together again. But now I'm going to put my hat on, my Chuck Mindenhall hat.
Man in the shirt, now man in the hat.
And I know that, without even consulting with him, I know that the fight that he is most looking forward to this weekend has to be Fodor versus Fodor.
Oh, yes. World
So
Series of Fighting.
that would be the World Series of Fighting fight between
Ben and Carlos.
Ben Fodor, also known as Phoenix Jones, the superhero, and his brother. I'm not sure, adoptive brother or half brother. We're not quite. We haven't.
I don't know. I don't. Pay
But I
attention
know
to
that he's
Series of
not
Fighting
full.
at all.
I know that his brother, Carlos Fodor, who was been around there. These are guys who fight typically in different weight classes, but they grew up together in the same house. Apparently, had a lot of fights amongst themselves that they didn't get paid for. So now they're going to get paid to fight. So I guess that Ken Shamrock versus Frank Shamrock fight we never got to see. Now we're going to get to see it only in a smaller version between two brothers. And I think that would be Chuck's choice.
And remember, we talked about gimmicks with the baby slice thing, brother versus brother. I mean, that's literally out of an MMA movie, right? Neither here nor there. I mean, I don't blame them. They got to get. It's a gimmick business, right? That's your
right.
gimmick. For me, I will go with two of them as well on UFC 201. Matt Brown versus Jake Ellenberger. I mean, I'm telling you, this is do or die for Jake Ellenberger. I don't see if he loses, if he sticks around. Even if he wins and grinds out a decision, I think the UFC is still going to be like, eh. But he's facing Matt Brown, who's going to have a lot to prove coming off that Demian Maia loss.
The Matt Brown fight, maybe I was wrong. Mindenhall never chooses anything but a Matt Brown fight.
Ooh.
That would be tough.
Well, that's what you get for being on a train that ran into a tree, Chuck Mindenhall. And then the other one is very small. Friday night, Megan Anderson taking on, I believe, Peggy Morgan. Megan Anderson is one of the top prospects at women's featherweight. Pay attention to her. I think she could make some noise. And then, of course, don't forget, Jessamine Duke, who is now 3-4, is also competing on that card. She might go 3-5. I don't know. We'll see. She's in tough, dire straits. So, from where she came from, it will be kind of a surprising career turn. Okay. Well, that is it. We covered a lot.
Yeah.
Not so bad, right?
Yeah.
Not so bad. You guys did terrible. I did great. Per usual. Ariel, I think, will be back next week, if I'm not mistaken. We wish him, of course, all the best. Watch for his coverage on our YouTube channel from Atlanta. We'll have interviews, of course, and everything else as he covers that. Chuck, I think, will be here next week as well. You're not going to be here.
I will not be, but he will.
We'll find a way to soldier on.
If he can get a train that doesn't run into a tree.
Yeah, that's a big if.
Yeah.
All right, but we appreciate everybody, you guys. Let me start that over. We appreciate you guys watching. For Danny, for the man in the hat who's not here, for the man in the shirt, for Ariel who's not here, I'm Luke Thomas. Hands up, chin down, let him fly. This is the MMA Beat.